This is Descr Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Descr. This is flyer number 211, entitled Masculist Ambivalence towards MGTOW. Description: this flyer spells out the main differences in approach towards men's lib taken by the MGTOW and the Masculists. MGTOW are largely apolitical and passive. Masculists are warriors who fight, who are very moralistic and in your face, putting enormous moral pressure on women to FIPup or be punished by men by not having one. And the flyer itself. Position this better. Masculist ambivalence towards MGTOW. Masculists have mixed feelings about MGTOW. On the positive side, there is considerable agreement between the two movements, about an 80% overlap in the ideas, for example. Both are men's lib groups. Both are trying to liberate men from the oppressions of manslavery, from female parasitism, etc., from misandrist laws regarding divorce, no para, paternity rejection right, etc. Where the two movements differ is on tactics, strategies, and levels of political vision. Masculists are sharply critical of MGTOW's lack of political vision and apolitical attitudes to social reform, to social engineering. There's also a geographical correlation between MGTOW apolitical passivity and masculist angry political strategies. Most American MGTOWs are strongly apolitical on strategic grounds. Most European masculists take a political visionary stance and are critical of the American apolitical lack of solidarity with the plight of other men. There's a fundamental disagreement on the desirability of political action and social engineering on the part of the MGTOWs and the masculists. The American MGTOWs argue that political action is a complete waste of time and energy. They argue that women are 51% of the voters and that women vote more than men, so that the gender politicians, whose political horizons extend only to the next election, will give in to women rather than to men, when some hot gender issue like divorce reform is a zero-sum game between men and women. The Masculists argue that if men get collectively angry and start lashing out verbally, ideologically on the media, at universities, etc., then God help women. We men are smarter and a lot more verbally aggressive than women, so all Masculists need to do is to educate men into Masculist ideas, get them angry so that they really start lashing out and get what men need, both socially and legally. There are probably personality and generational differences between MGTOW and Masculists as well. Speaking as a 70-year-old Masculist, I feel alienated by the level of political wimpiness of the MGTOW, who are mostly half my age, for example Sandman, TFM, that's turd, flinging monkey, etc. I feel I have more in common with the older MGTOWs who share more my Masculist vision of the world, for example John of MGTOW as Freedom YouTube channel. He is late 40s and has a definite combative streak in his personality, being a former Marine. My feeling is that if he were exposed to Masculist ideas, he would become a Masculist. Masculism would be closer to his true nature because John is a fighter. It's in his DNA. So which of the two visions, MGTOW apolitical passivity or Masculist angry politics, is correct, in quotes, and more likely to succeed? I will spend the rest of this essay making up the Masculist case of why Masculists feel that their approach to men's lib is superior, and you, the reader, can decide for yourself whether you agree or not. The American MGTOWs look on the American MRM, men's rights movement, as piss weak and taking too much of a poor me, the oppressed man attitude that turns most men off, giving that men are socialized to be self-reliant, tough-minded, and to lick their own wounds. I'm inclined to agree. I don't find the US MRM very effective, so it's not surprising they've had little impact. So what are they doing wrong? In a word, they are not masculist enough. That is, they're not taking a European masculist stance to gender politics for men. If they use European masculist tactics and ideas, masculist ideology, they would do a lot better, in my view. This is not an idle boast. In the early 80s, I almost single-handedly got the European men's lib movement launched in the European media. I spent 20 years of my life in Europe, speaking fluent English, Francais, Deutsch, and Nederlands. After a decade of angry feminism in the 70s, the European media, UK, Belgian, Dutch, French, German, Danish, Australian, etc., were eager to hear the views of an angry masculist who lashed out at parasitic women who did not bother to get off their lazy bums and become career competent, that is, FIPs, financially independent persons, and expected fluffy style to be able to parasite off the money of men. I was on the European media in these four languages about 200 times. In Melbourne, I made the cover of the nation's equivalent of Time magazine on men's issues. In a year or so, I will leave the Chinese shithole where I've been living for the past 11 years, and will live in Melbourne for a while, and perhaps later spend a few years living in Cambridge, UK. I'll be able to use my own language, so I'm really curious to see what I can do for men's lib, Masculist and MGTOW, in Australia. I feel my talents as a masculist are wasted in shithole, no organisations, no movements at all, dictatorial China. I will start with the universities in Oz, writing large essays for the student magazines, hoping they will provide me with the publicity to be able to give major talks at the universities, and invite the media to come. In such talks, I'll take a heavy masculist, angry, confrontational, in-your-face approach, lashing out at the hated fluffy parasites and the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites. I will appeal to the men in the audiences to adopt the MGTOW approach to life by refusing to marry, refusing to have kids, and spending their money on themselves doing what they love doing. I will lash out at the gender politicians who are the most hated by the masculists, because it is they who have created the laws that force the MGTOWs into being. I will spell out the fact that no culture that financially massacres one married father in four, destroying his life, can survive. Men will eventually rise up, pick up arms and start killing people in a sex war. Gender politicians will be assassinated, and thousands of feminist or male feminist divorce court judges and lawyers will be murdered. To avoid this massacre, it's imperative that the gender laws be made men fair, or there will be extensive bloodshed, a war, a sex war. I will appeal to the men in the audience that if they're stupid enough to marry, to have kids, then they will have a 1 in 4 chance of being financially massacred by the hated fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system, which sees men as subhuman cash machines, an attitude that enrages masculists and makes them want to pick up arms. I will point out the massive hypocrisy and injustice of the fluffy feminist hypocrites who have no qualms in financially massacring men in a divorce. Divorcing fathers will have their kids ripped away from them with a 90% probability. They will lose half their possessions and their house, which will be given by the court to his fluffy ex-wife, so that she can raise her kids in it. He will be forced to pay child support to her kids that he will barely see. And if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may have to pay her alimony, so that she can sit on her fat parasitic ass and parasite off him after the divorce the same way she did before the divorce, with no moral or legal obligation on her to get off her ass and get a job. As a masculist, when I'm speaking, I get very angry and use my PhD professorial full intelligence to mix being both highly articulate with real angry passion, so that I try to hit the brain and the gut at the same time, with a powerful, very persuasive combination. In the 90s in Japan, I got nearly as much publicity as the rest of several hundred other researchers in the lab I was working at, combined. I hope I'll be able to bring this gift for publicity to Men's Lib in Oz when I live there. I'll lash out at the lack of the paternity rejection right that the fluffy feminists will fight tooth and nail, because if men get a legislated para, that will mean that fluffies will no longer be able to exist. Women will be forced to grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives by getting a career competent education and later career, so that they are FIPs and not fluffies, parasiting off a man's money. The fact that men don't have a para when women have the mara, aka abortion right, is the most blatant example of sexual discrimination against men. I will tell the audience that the fluffies are the enemy of the masculists, and it is our primary political goal to free men from manslavery this century, worldwide, by wiping out the fluffies and fluffy feminists, not by killing them, but simply ignoring them totally, MGTOW style. Masculists punish women who are not FIPs by ignoring them to death, forcing them to rot on the shelf to extinction. Young women now are learning to hate the fluffy feminists as much as men do, because these young women are realizing that the prime cause for them not being able to persuade quality young men to give them their sperm is that 2/3 of young men in a string of major countries have now gone MGTOW in practice, if not in philosophy, refusing to marry, refusing to have kids, and spending their money on themselves. Young women now realize that they don't dare state publicly that they are feminists, because if they're stupid enough to do that, then that would be the kiss of death for them in terms of getting a man, because no man wants a relationship with a misandrist, man-dumping, feminazi bitch. Feminazi bitches are the first category of women to be rejected by men. Men won't go near them like the plague. Such women rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. Utterly rejected by both sexes now. I'll push the masculist vision of creating a FIP society, that is, one in which both sexes, especially young women, are socialized by parents and taught by teachers to be FIPs, to choose a career-competent education. However, in today's world, 3/4 of such young women at age 16 still choose to study intellectually easy, intellectually lazy, fluffy crap majors that will exclude them from studying career-competent STEM, STEM, science, tech, engineering, math majors, and the professions at college. These future fluffies will then have some 40 different penises in them by the time they are in their 30s and suffering baby rabies, when they start looking around for some man-slave ignoramus to parasite upon. In a decade, there won't be any such men left, due to the influence of MGTOW and masculist ideas, causing young men to hate fluffies and forcing them to FIP up or be punished by men by them not getting one. Masculists are very conscious that the FIPping of society would solve so many of the gender role problems that men have. The massive gender injustice of the divorce courts would be solved if all women were FIPs. A paternity rejection right, would be brought in. Men would be freed from man's slavery and be happier. Men would not be financially massacred by the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system. Given the critical importance of making all women FIPs, the masculists aim at forcing women to become FIPs, or they are punished by men. The masculist vision is to create a FIP society through social engineering and moralistic, social, ideological pressure. Masculists place heavy moralistic pressure on women to FIP up or rot on the shelf. Fluffies are spat at, labelled as immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out. Masculists are particularly moralistic and hateful towards the fluffy feminist hypocrites who want equal rights with men but reject equal obligations with men in terms of sharing the burden of earning the living by bothering to get a career-competent education, by fipping up at high school and college. Masculists will harangue a feminazi bitch to her face with twice the venom and brilliance of a woman and blow her away, accusing her of being a fluffy feminist hypocrite, massacring men in the divorce courts, and deserving her fate of being manless and hated by both sexes. That is, hated by men for treating men as subhuman cash machines, and by women for causing men to reject giving women their sperm, forcing women to be babyless, and hence driving them crazy. In short, masculism has a vision of wiping out manslavery, of socially engineering a FIP society, of wiping out fluffies and fluffy feminists by forcing all women to FIP up or be punished by not having a man. We men have the financial power to force women to FIP up because nearly all men are FIPs. We are socialized to be FIPs and don't need to parasite off a woman to survive financially. By refusing to be parasited upon by fluffies, men are forcing women to FIP up or be severely punished by becoming manless, left rotting on the shelf. This kind of masculist anger and masculist rhetoric is appealing to many male journalists I found in the 80s. I'm curious to see if the formula will still work in the current decade when I start living in Oz. MGTOWs don't have a political vision. They simply quietly walk away from marriage and paternity. They differ from the Masculists, who are political, giving Masculist talks at universities, getting on the broadcast media, being angry and in your face with the fluffy feminist hypocrites, spitting at the fluffy vermin, etc. There is a very definite difference in style between the MGTOW and the Masculists. The MGTOW are political wimps, or apolitical wimps. The Masculists are warriors. Sure, if millions of men go MGTOW, then that will have political consequences, but the whole process of bringing down the current genocracy, where men's rights and the oppression of men are ignored, will be greatly accelerated if it's given a hefty Masculist kick. Masculists aim to make men collectively angry, intolerant of their current oppression by the genocracy. Once that happens, men will then block vote, forcing the gender politicians to men-fair the gender laws, or they lose office. The para will be brought in. The social climate will change, with a strong moral expectation that women are to be FIPs, and God help those who aren't. Fluffies will suffer severely. Masculists socially engineer. They are very political and very moralistic. They ideologize and use labels that they invent to hurl at Masculist enemies, the fluffies, the fluffy feminist hypocrites, the hated gender politicians, the male feminist traitors, etc. In the above senses, Masculists are a very different kettle of fish to the MGTOWs. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel names: DeGaris Masculist MGTOW Flyers and DeGaris Essays. Ciao.